Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Asphalian's joint webinar with TÜBSÜD, Preclinical Testing Requirements under Regulation 2017-745 on medical devices, a notified body's perspective. Before starting, a couple of things to take into consideration. The webinar will last for about 1 hour and 15 minutes, with 15 extra minutes at the end for Q&As. In case you have any questions, please submit them in the chat. We will also send you the presentation as well as the link to the recording shortly. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Dr. Carlo Gherardi, Lead Auditor and Technical Documentation Assessor for Non-Active Medical Devices at TÜBSÜD. Chemist by training, Carlo has over 20 years experience in the medical devices field, specializing in sterile non-active devices. Since 2004, he has been with TÜV Italia as lead auditor and technical documentation assessor, actively supporting EU MDR conformity assessments both in Italy and internationally. Also up to date, Dr. Patricia Marmol, Senior MedTech Consultant at Asphalion in Regulatory Affairs with medical devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices. Patricia is a biologist specialized in molecular biology and biochemistry, with over 15 years of research experience and currently fully dedicated to regulatory affairs. Her areas of expertise are clinical strategy, clinical and performance evaluation, biocompatibility, and CE marking. In today's webinar, they will offer a deep dive into the essential preclinical testing requirements defined by the EU MDR. Our colleague Marian will talk briefly about Asphalion services now. Marian, please.
Sure. Thank you, Lydia, for the introduction. So this year, Asphalion is turning 25, which is, we are very happy. We are a regulatory and scientific affairs consultancy company. And for the past 25 years, we have been together with the industry, dealing with more than 1,000 clients and 5,000 projects. And it's really our pleasure to be here. We are now close to 200 team members. So from Asphalion, just very shortly, don't worry, we're going to get into details really soon. We actually offer comprehensive support for the medtech industry, dealing with all the services for medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and combination products. So the integral regulatory solutions offer go from EU, FDA, CE marking, and support for new and innovative medical devices, as well as participating in some Horizon Europe projects. And last but not least, this is a very short overview of all the services we provide, from the pre-market services, certification, and post-market. From the pre-market, specifically feasibility assessment, roadmaps, all the definitions of standards, everything that goes from that idea that will turn into a medical device or an in vitro and even a medical device software. Into the certification, of course, focusing on clinical and preclinical, which we will deal with that today, and the post-market. Once everything has been cleared and approved by authorities, either in Europe or the US, we can also support with all the post-market surveillance. So this is Asphalion, and I will now give the word to my colleague, Patricia.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I will talk about preclinical data and some relevant aspects related to clinical data, actually, and some of the specifics of animal testing within the preclinical data under MDR. But actually, I will start talking about clinical data. And is that by now we are all very aware of the importance of clinical data within the regulation 2017-745, that is the MDR. This regulation was published in 2017 and came into effect in 2021. And clinical data has a very important role in increasing patient safety, supporting device claims, supporting performance safety of the device, and supporting the benefit risk acceptability and the compliance with GSPR. The regulation, the MDR, replaced the directive for the Medical Device Directive and the Active Implantable Medical Device Directive. But also, preclinical data can also support actually compliance with GSPR. Is very relevant to patient safety and also support performance safety of the device. For those of you who are not very familiar with medical devices of the MDR, I will introduce what is a medical device that is defined in the Article 2 of MDR. And it's a device that follows specific purposes, medical purposes, such as diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment, or alleviation of disease. Diagnosis, monitoring, treatment, alleviation or compensation for an injury or disability, investigation, replacement or modification of the anatomy of a physiological or pathological process, or also may provide information by means of an in vitro examination of specimens derived from the human body. Actually, the contents of the technical documentation are included in Annex 2 of the Medical Device Regulation in Section 6, that is product verification and validation. And what is said about preclinical data is that it should be included all results of tests related to engineering, laboratory, simulated use, animal test, published literature, and include the test design, the protocols, the data analysis, along with data summaries and test conclusions. And it's also specified that where applicable, it should be shown conformity with the provisions of Directive 2004-10. There are actually a few slides ahead. I will talk a little more about and show the relationship with preclinical data. Also, it should be defined a justification for a rationale of new testing for a medical device. It's in this same section 6 where it's also included the relevant clinical documentation of the medical device, that is the clinical evaluation plan and report, and the post-market clinical follow-up documentation. Actually, some of the preclinical data that we will generate with the device will be at some extent directly or indirectly included in the or considered in this clinical evaluation. For example, biocompatibility or usability. However, a specific type of preclinical data that is performance and safety testing with animals will not be directly considered in the clinical evaluation of the medical device, but it has a very important role. So the preclinical data, it goes into the technical documentation that will be assessed during the conformity assessment of the medical device by a notified body. But when new clinical data needs to be generated through a clinical investigation, it needs to be part of the documentation required is the investigator's brochure. The contents of this document is specified in section 2.5 on Annex 15 of the MDR and should be submitted to a competent authority in each member state where the clinical investigation will take place. This investigation brochure contains all the relevant preclinical data or summaries of this data, and actually the clinical data then that is generated through the clinical investigation will be included in the clinical evaluation of the medical device. Just to make clear that there are some medical devices which do not have associated clinical data, such as the integral drug device combination products, where the main action is achieved by the drug, and they don't have a CE mark, but they do have a technical documentation with that may not have clinical data associated, and this technical documentation, this technical dossier, is assessed by the process denominated a notified body opinion. According to the good clinical practices that are included in the ISO 14155, that is sets the framework for the good clinical practices for medical devices. Before a clinical investigation is initiated, foreseeable risk should be weighed against the potential benefits. And also, according to these good clinical practices, the non-clinical information shall be adequate and support the clinical investigation. That means that this preclinical or non-clinical information should support the safety of the device so that it can be investigated in humans. And here we can see that it has a very, very important role in starting the clinical developmental process of a medical device. The requirements of content in the investigation brochure has different types of preclinical data. It can be allocated into what is called in design calculations that support the design and mechanical strength of the device, or it can be bench testing, in which we can differentiate between horizontal tests that are preclinical evaluation tests that are valid for any device, or they can be what the so-called vertical test. That depends specifically on the type of device. The horizontal tests can be actually are usability, interoperability and compatibility, performance, and reliability. And vertical tests may include mechanical, electrical safety, and electromagnetical compatibility, biocompatibility and biological safety, software verification and validation, cybersecurity, validation of cleaning, disinfection and sterilization, or packaging validation. Also, this preclinical data specified as contents of the investigation brochure are animal tests. Animal testing are not typically included into bench testing, although sometimes of bench testing may include animals, but this typical safety and performance testing is not included into this bench testing. And the information that we shall include must be a thorough evaluation of the results of the test, along with the study design. For example, the special species used, breed, numbers of animals per group, age of animals, version of the device, if it is the final version or a prototype, choice of agent of comparator, duration of exposure, standard supply, and acceptance criteria for this preclinical testing. Also, we should indicate any deviations from the protocols and the conclusions of the testing. It's very relevant that this type of testing, also any kind of animal testing, even if not the same kind of this, but animal testing with biocompatibility and related to biocompatibility and biological safety, follow good laboratory practice. So it's relevant to indicate the good laboratory practice status. And if they are not following this, provide a sound justification for that. So a very often we have the confusion among our clients of the difference of the animal testing related to biocompatibility and biological safety and the animal testing involved and performance and safety of the device. Biocompatibility is the ability of the medical device or material to perform with an appropriate host response in a specific application. And biological safety is the freedom from unacceptable biological risk in the context of the intended use, according to the ISO 10993. On the other hand, performance is generally defined as the ability of the device to achieve its intended purpose as stated by the manufacturer, by the MDR, and safety is the freedom from unacceptable risk. So actually, biocompatibility and biological safety assess safety of the device is a very important part of the overall risk management of the device, but they have different scope at the safety assessed in the performance and safety animal testing. So in the biocompatibility and biological safety, is very relevant the device categorization. So the device categorization is defined by nature of body contact or by duration of that contact. While in performance of safety testing, we should have very well defined the intended use of the device. We need to evaluate risk in this animal testing, the environment. We should know also the clinical performance requirements. This testing should reflect as much as possible the clinical endpoints of a future clinical investigation, and also this type of testing will assess the interaction of the device with living systems. For biocompatibility, we usually have very well defined protocols that are included in the international ISO standards 10993 of this standard series. And this is a non-exhaustive list of the endpoints that are for which testing is performed in vivo in animal. It may be these endpoints that are defined by the categorization of the device, are sensitization, irritation or intercutaneous reactivity, any material-mediated pyrogenicity, systemic toxicity, either acute, subacute, subchronic, chronic, implantation, reproductive and developmental toxicity. And here, for example, there are usually defined animal models for these protocols. For example, for skin sensitization are typically mice or guinea pigs. Irritation, the preferred model is rabbit. For systemic toxicity and implantation, there is a little bit more flexibility in the animal model used, but usually small animals are preferred, while the use of larger animals is more restricted to a specific use with a clear justification. While the specific model of animal testing that we use in safety and performance needs to be tailored to our medical device, the future clinical use and intrinsic characteristics of the device. And it's very common that during more exploratory phases of the medical device development, during exploratory phases, while we are evaluating proof of principle, more preliminary animal models, small laboratory animals are used. But as we approach to more preclinical and more advanced developmental phases, and we test safety and performance of the device in animal models. With a final version or near final version of the device, we move to a specific preclinical models that do not necessarily need to be the same as the preliminary animal models. It's although not very common, it's worth checking whether there is an international standard that is available for the type of testing in that specific device. It's very relevant to follow good laboratory practices. And these are principles that are stated in the principles published by the organization OECD. The current version is the revision of 1997. And these principles concern non-clinical data, testing of a chemical or chemical product, examine under laboratory conditions or in the environment, including work conducted in greenhouses and in the field. And they do not apply to studies which use human subjects. And these good laboratory practices, they define a quality system that allows to have quality standards so that we can have these quality standards. They apply to both organization, management, and testing per se, and they can result in very important outcomes that are a high quality and reliable test data. And for example, from an ethical point of view, in less number of animals required use during testing. Again, as I mentioned before, the Directive 2004 and 10 that is mentioned in Annex 2 of the MDR is the link between good laboratory practices and the MDR. This directive is harmonized laws and other good laboratory practices in the European Union. And in this case, good laboratory practice, these principles should be followed ideally through all the testing stages with animals, although it's not very common that they are followed from the beginning in basic research. But as we approach to more regulatory testing, they should be followed. It's important to, for this reason, to when we are planning the preclinical testing with animals, to try to look for no clinical testing facilities that have a GLP certification. These certifications are under a national GLP authority within a OECD CMP program. And when this is not possible, when the animal testing is not possible to be performed following good laboratory practices, we should provide a justification, and then the animal test results should adhere to Arabic guidelines for reporting results. So here I would like to highlight a couple of take-home messages about this preclinical testing, and is that the preclinical data is relevant data needed for the technical dossier of a medical device during the conformity assessment, but it has a very important role earlier when we need to perform a clinical investigation, because it really supports the safeness of the device when we embark into the clinical development of the device. Also, that the animal models for safety and performance, they need to be very, very the decision of using one model or the other should be carefully evaluated, because we need to think ahead in the clinical use of the device, and then we should think ahead of the risk, the clinical endpoints, the clinical performance requirements, and very important, try always to adhere and to think ahead to perform any animal testing within the good laboratory practices principles. This was my presentation, and now.
Thank you, Patricia, for this fantastic presentation. So, Carlo, the stage is yours. You may begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now share my screen. Okay, so my presentation should be visible
Perfect.
to all. Okay, yeah. Very good. Okay, so my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to Asphalion for this invitation. It's really my pleasure, and I'm looking forward also to the question and the discussion. Maybe usually it's the most interesting part beside the speech that I can give to you. So my presentation is in perfect continuity with Patricia's presentation. So I will give you the notified bodies view on the preclinical data on medical device. And it's important to say that in this case, I represent the TÜV-SÜD group, where in reference to the medical device regulation and the role of a notified body, TÜV-SÜD has two notified bodies. One is the historical German notified body, TÜV-SÜD Product Service, the notified body number 0123, while recently we have also another notified body in the family, which is TÜV-SÜD located in Denmark, a notified body 2443. Just a short note about myself. I was already presented. Anyhow, it's 20 years the time part of TÜV-SÜD group, while in my former experience I had 10 years in the medical device industry with the role of quality manager and regulatory affairs manager in Italy. Who knows the Italian landscape of medical device company? There is an incredible area close to the province of Modena with the small town of Mirandola, which is called the Medical Device Valley. There are a lot of, maybe much more workers on the medical device industries than the real citizens of the small town, which is very nice indeed, but the medical device business is very important. So after this experience, I moved to TÜV-SÜD, and for 20 years I've been auditor, lead auditor, technical documentation assessor. My main area of expertise is non-active medical devices and especially sterilization and clean room technologies. However, in the past years, I moved to a new role, so to do the welcome and the onboarding of new clients. And in this new role, I really am facing much more type of medical devices. That's why also in the presentation, I will give you some highlights and notes on the most critical and hot topics in terms of preclinical testing of the medical device. And then I will tell you later some of the highlights I think are significant in this. Some short disclaimers. Even if we have a regulation, we have standards, we have MDCG guidance and many other guidelines. However, the notified body interpretation and approach sometimes is important to be mentioned. So that's why, while I will try to present the basic medical device requirements on preclinical testing, I will add the TÜV-SÜD main interpretation, especially with the role of a notified body. So while Patricia presented the manufacturers with the support of the laboratories and the consultants and the expertise in the design and manufacturing, I will present the opinion and the approach of the independent, impartial, objective, notified body that has the responsibility to do the third-party conformity assessment, to give the recommendation and the final decision by the notified body to grant a certificate related to the conformity assessment, which is the base then for manufacturers for placing in the market. It's important to say that I'm not the notified body. I have some responsibility and some role according to the notified body, and basically I will tell you which is the point of view of who is doing the assessment of the technical documentation and related documents, and who is doing the audits, because sometimes things are in correlation. The final decision is always given by an independent committee located at the site of the notified body, taking the final decision about the recommendation by the assessor. In this case, it's important to say that our interpretation is, let me say, validated by the designating authority, and in the case of TÜV-SÜD Product Service is the German competent authority given the designation to be a notified body. So sometimes we have also to consider this, and in some cases there are minor and small differences between, however, aligned at the European level. In addition, I will give you some specific examples of TÜV-SÜD procedural approach. So what we do, and if you are curious, you can go to our website, where we have, especially in the field of preclinical testing, in our website, there are some guidances on how to present data on biological safety, sterilization, validation of packaging, validation of the reprocessing instruction, just to give you some example. In my presentation, I will give you some simplification of the steps in view of the simplicity and the time that we have, not to make a presentation boring and not interesting. And I will give you some highlights, and I made a decision of what could be more interesting for this audience. Of course, depending on the type of the specific device, there may be additional topics to those presented here, and feel free to make questions at the end. Okay, so let's start after the presentation. What is a conformity assessment by the notified body? What is the job of the notified body and the responsibility? Based on the EU regulation, the three pillars of the conformity assessment process are the assessment of safety, the assessment of performances, which are the two basic pillars. I added also regulatory, because in a conformity assessment, in addition to safety and to performance, there are also some key requirements that are given by the regulation itself. So that are maybe linked to safety, maybe linked to performance, or maybe simply linked to the requirements of the MDR, let's say about some requirements on labeling or on the instructions for use or in the SSCP, if applicable. In cases, these are pure definition of the medical device directive that shall be applied by the manufacturer and subsequently verified and assessed by the notified body. So that's why I added also regulatory, while the core of the conformity assessment is safety and performance, because the two aspects are linked together. Of course, the device shall be safe. So also very well explained by Patricia in the initial presentation. The device shall ensure a level of risk which is appropriated to the benefit of the device, which is based on the risk-benefit ratio. But in addition, the device shall do what it is claimed for. If a device has a certain claim, even if safety is ensured, also the performance shall be ensured. So the functions, the properties, the characteristic, any claim given by the manufacturer in the labeling, in the promotional material, in the instruction for use, in the technical specification, shall be demonstrated. So the conformity assessment is not only focused to say, okay, this device does not make anything bad, but also this device will do anything good which is claimed by the manufacturer. And the performance can come from applicable standards, but can be also a specific definition and claim by the manufacturer. And during the conformity assessment, safety and performances are assessed by the notified body. And in this, preclinical data are of course something very important to demonstrate a certain safety and performance. This is not the end, and Patricia explained very well, because then we have the clinical part. But talking today on preclinical data, anything which is claimed by the manufacturer shall have a sufficient demonstration by all relevant clinical data. So moving to definition of preclinical data, I take the definition, then I will have another definition in next slides, but first I go from Annex 2, which is the annex in the MDR, describing the content of the technical documentation. And in section 6.1, preclinical data is defined as the collection of the results of test, engineering, laboratory, simulated use, animal test, together with evaluation of the published literature applicable to the device, taking into account the intended purpose and the specification. So first, we see the first important part. The notified body will look for tests conducted by the manufacturer, but in addition, the notified body will ask also an evaluation of public literature supporting the preclinical testing, because in many cases, this will be the justification and the rationale also to support certain decision. In addition, for preclinical, in the clinical test shall be supported by test design, complete the protocols about how the tests have been conducted, the method of data analysis, in addition to the data summaries and test conclusions. We will go to more details later. Then there is a list of topics that shall be considered by the manufacturer, and these are linked to the GSPR, and Patricia well defined the combination of vertical and horizontal requirements. This is some, not all of them may be applicable because it depends on the device, but for sure, biocompatibility, if applicable, shall be considered, including the identification of all materials in direct or indirect contact with the patient of the user. And here we have a very important part that will be part of the assessment of the notified body, is not only the fact that we look for biocompatibility testing, but before and as an input to the biocompatibility testing, if applicable, we need a very clear identification of all materials in direct or indirect contact with the body. And this identification of materials and characterization and need to have a definition of all the materials is something which is always assessed by the notified body. Then we have physical, chemical, and microbial characterization of the medical device and all the materials. If applicable, part of the preclinical testing is evidences on electrical safety and electromagnetic compatibility. If the device is a software standalone, or if the device includes an embedded software, the notified body will look for software verification and validation. And later I will have some highlights on the topic of artificial intelligence, which is something not explicitly mentioned in the medical devices regulation, but which is really under attention already by the notified body during assessment. I will have some details later. Always the notified body will look for stability, including shelf life data, and of course, performance and safety. Performance and safety you see here as a final note, as a symbol, very small, but it's at the end. There's a word behind on performance and safety. So to summarize, all these requirements supporting performance and safety, results of test, evaluation of literature, test design and results, biocompatibility, physical, chemical, and microbial characterization, electrical safety and electromagnetic compatibility, software, stability, and shelf life shall be present in the technical documentation, and the notified body will look for that. In general, this is applicable to any type of medical device. Medical device can be any type of product thinking to the design. However, there will be specific and different focus. So for a standalone software, most probably biocompatibility, chemical, microbial will be not really of interest, while for a device made on plastic or chemicals, electrical safety, electromagnetic, and software will be not applicable. This is up to you, and this is one of the first part during the design process and the assessment of the applicable GSPR defined in Annex 1. It's a duty of the manufacturer to have an assessment of all the general safety and performance requirement stating which is applicable and which not. And of course, based on the nature and the characteristic of a given medical device, it's very, for some, it's very easy to state that it's not applicable and the reason. And this is an expectation by the notified body. And please consider that when we as notified body perform an assessment of the technical documentation, we always start from the rationale at the base of the manufacturer for the decision to perform any specific test. So it's not that we look for a bulk of documents and the more is better. No, first we need to understand which are the plans and why certain tests have been conducted, why certain have been not conducted. So we move to the next slide, where I can say that the notified body assessment will try first to understand the process that the manufacturers performed to achieve the conclusion that it's possible to propose a certain medical device for a conformity assessment, or to assess if since we conduct a technical documentation assessment, not only for initial certification, but also to confirm the continued validity of a certain MDR certificate. So we perform technical documentation to confirm that the requirements of the medical device regulation are still confirmed. So first, we need to have a clear statement and a clear plan, which is based on the design data. So we look for the design inputs, the design plans, to understand why certain tests can be conducted and how the design inputs are demonstrated by preclinical testing. We look for sure at the beginning to the risk management. Risk management is a source of a lot of requirements that are then demonstrated through the testing. Many tests performed during preclinical testing supports the demonstration that certain risks are under a specific control measure and are a specific risk control. GSPR, assessment of the general safety and performance requirement, is something that for which we do a cross-reference to check how you define that something was needed or not. And in addition, finally, special regulatory requirements depending on the characteristic of the device. And I think that what I'm describing here in the green square, design, risk management, GSPR, and regulatory requirement, is something that also we assess to check consistency and harmonization between each other. If you, just to give you an example, if we find a certain test and nowhere in the design plan, in the risk management, in the GSPR refers to the given test, we do not understand why you perform it. Or to justify certain acceptance criteria and decision, we need that is supported in any of the design documents, risk management, GSPR, or regulatory requirements. So based on the green part, design, risk, GSPR, and regulatory, we expect to find preclinical testing and interpretation of the results. So we expect to find a list of testing you conduct based on a certain planning with a certain assessment of checklist. We did, passed, or in case of something did not pass, if you accepted, which is the reason to accept it. And this will feed the technical documentation, which is at the end the final collector of all the documents, which is under the assessment of the notified body. For sure, preclinical data and testing is the section where the notified body will go and try to find if you demonstrated all the design inputs and the product requirement. But in many cases, preclinical testing can feed also risk management. And in other cases, preclinical testing can be a source to support the clinical data. Clinical data, by definition, is something different from preclinical data. Anyhow, information from preclinical data can be a source for clinical data. And in addition, for manufacturer, there are based the clinical evaluation on article of MDR 6110. So devices where clinical evaluation does not is proposed not to be in the need of clinical data, but will be based on performance data. Of course, preclinical data will be the core of a clinical evaluation plan and report for devices applying Article 6110 regarding the so-called clinical evaluation based on performance and bench testing. In addition, preclinical data can be a source to support post-market surveillance, assessment of certain data, and so on, and many other parts of the technical documentation. This slide is I decided to propose you this slide because you see that there is a certain process that the notified body do in the assessment, and we always look to consistencies and cross-references between the different documents of the technical documentation, and anything you can do to make easier, visible, and justified how you conducted preclinical testing will for sure help and make more efficient the assessment of the technical documentation by the notified body. So this is in general the general process from design to documented evidence feeding the technical documentation. Going to a little bit more details, how then you can achieve a certain preclinical data and an evidence on device safety and performance information. For sure, we expect that you start from a plan where you collect all device requirement and the design inputs, and one by one, depending on the product. For any product, it can be a syringe or a software. We expect first that based on all device requirement and design input, you have a plan and a test protocol with a definition of what you want to do, which are the acceptance criteria, how you will do, which type of methods and techniques and analysis you will do that. If you will do that internally with your internal testing department, or if you will outsource to external laboratories, which are the acceptance criteria, how you will handle the out of specification results, this predefined in the plan, in the protocol, in the test method. Then this is the first. Then we expect to have evidence of the test execution. So the results you had, which sample you tested, how many, which is the justification of how many samples you tested, and which result you had. After the result, we need the interpretation of the result. We need to know if each specific final number is acceptable or not, depending on the acceptance criteria, and if you had any out of specification, how you accepted, how you addressed, did you do a retesting, did you increase the sample size, did you fully reject it and you change the design? Of course, if you are submitted a final technical documentation, something good should be in it. So if you had any non-conformities of out of specification, we need to have a very clear conclusion and justification why you accepted the results. So these 4 steps we expect that are applied in a systematic and detailed sequence with the visible documentation documented with the good documentation practice and with the traceability of all the data and so on. So the references that Patricia did in the presentation about good laboratory practice, the principles we expect that are applied also for any test that you perform in-house, and not only. Usually GLP concepts are considered for chemical and microbial and biological test, but the concept of the technique, the traceability of samples and the evidence we expect that are applied to any type of testing, and we will go later also on that. So moving back to the definition of preclinical data, let me say in other words. First, I took in the slide regarding what is a preclinical data, I took from Annex 2. Now I take the definition of the preclinical data based on a negative definition of a clinical data. If you look to the definition in Article 2 of MDR, there is no definition of preclinical data, but you have the definition of clinical data at item 48 of Article 2. Clinical data means information concerning safety or performance that is generated from the use of a medical device. And this is the source of the clinical evaluation plan, of the clinical evaluation report, and the clinical data that also Patricia presented in the presentation. But taking, so the negative, the preclinical data, in other words, are all the information and the evidences that you take when the device is not used according to its intended use in humans or in the real use in the market. So we consider that the preclinical data are all data that you collect prior to placing the device in the market and prior to use that on humans or in the real use, which shall be considered a clinical data. So meaning that preclinical data are all the data, the evidences, and the testing you collect while you use your device in a lab, in a bench, in a testing environment without using it on humans. And many design inputs are usually demonstrated by preclinical testing. And who of you is familiar with the definition of the ISO 13485 and the definition of the design process? While preclinical data are feeding the design verification phase to demonstrate that the design outputs are verified against the design inputs, and this is the typical preclinical data umbrella, while the clinical data are under the design validation, part, which is supporting that the device resulting from the design is capable to achieve the intended purpose. So for preclinical data, we are talking about in other words, everything you do during the design verification phase. Let me use these words. Going to another concept, let me mention Article 8 of MDR, use of harmonized standard, which is one of the key factors that can also be discussed with the notified body. Which are the standards that the manufacturer used to demonstrate conformity? Why certain standards have not been used? Why you use the standard instead of another? And for example, one of the hot topic, there is a new standard or the change standard, how to handle transition time and how to address changes in standard. Let's start from Article 8 of MDR. Devices that are in conformity with the relevant harmonized standard shall be presumed to be in conformity with the requirements of this regulation. I'm sure that all of you are well aware of this requirement. So the importance of harmonized standard, and when there is an harmonized standard and you have a device where an harmonized standard is existing, the definition of harmonized standard is that there is a need that the harmonized standard is published in the official journal of the European Union, including also the monograph of the European Pharmacopoeia is applicable to the devices you have. If you have an harmonized standard, the notified body has the expectation, let me say really pragmatically, the notified body has the expectation that you apply it. If you read well this article, it's not written that it's mandatory to apply the harmonized standard. It's but the contrary, that if you apply to the harmonized standard and the application is correct and your device is in conformity with the standard, the presumption of conformity shall be considered. And this is something which will be part of the preclinical assessment by the notified body. So looking to your design document, looking to the GSPR checklist, looking to the risk management, it's an expectation of the notified body that you assess the applicable standard. If there are harmonized standards, we expect that there is an application of them. And very important, if for any reason manufacturer decided not to apply an harmonized standard, we expect to have a well-defined justification and the reason of that. Not all standards are harmonized, but standard considered state-of-the-art, there is an expectation of the application of them by the manufacturer. In case, so there is an harmonized standard, there is a standard, and you have a testing which is conducted in-house or externally, we expect an assessment of the standard, the clear definition of which part of the standard you applied, if some part are not applicable, why you didn't apply, and the evidence that the standard was applied, and how the results have been assessed. And again, we do an assessment of consistency between the different parts. So just consider that, for example, if you mention a certain standard on the labeling and on the instruction for use or in the technical specification of your device, please consider that in that case, the standard becomes the performance claim or a safety claim, and in that way, automatically the notified body will be very deep in the assessment of your application. Or if you claim a certain standard in your GSPR and you say that you apply, and if there are any incomplete application or not full conformity of devices, for us, if you show that you apply the standard in the GSPR, then the standard becomes mandatory. So when there are standards, there is the benefit of the standard that this harmonized, especially harmonized standard, provides to you a way to have a good system to demonstrate the conformity. On the other side, if there is a standard and you claim the application, we expect the application is correct, is complete, and is appropriate. In her presentation, Patricia mentioned the many standards for biocompatibility and a series of 10993, but depending on the devices, there are many. So depending on the device, many. If we talk about an active device, all the standard about electrical safety, functional safety, and specific requirements are expected to be applied. So please consider as a take-home message that the notified body will have this we will look for a correlation between the standard you apply, the GSPR, the design document, and all the evidences you provide. Now I move, making a bridge to the introduction that Patricia had. Now I move explicitly to the general safety and performance requirement of MDR. So from Annex 9. I do this because this helps us to have something like a list of all the possible requirements in the MDR, where of course your specific device, any of you, will consider, depending on the applicability, which are, and maybe not all of them will be. And I will give you some highlights on the applicable topic. The structure of Annex 1 of MDR is in 3 chapters. We have chapter 1 with the general requirements. Some of them are really applicable to any devices. Performance, safety, the device shall achieve the performance claimed by the manufacturer. The device shall be subjected to a risk management process, blah, blah, blah. Then I jump to chapter 3. It's the chapter in the section of MDR Annex 1 on requirements regarding information supplied with the device, and that there are requirements for the labeling, requirements for the instruction for use. In many cases, cross-linked together with chapter 2, depending on the different requirements. So in view of the preclinical data we are talking today, chapter 3 is not of major importance. However, everything is mentioned in the instruction for use and in the labeling will be cross-checked by the notified body for consistency in the preclinical data. While the core of the requirement with specific vertical requirements is in chapter 2 of Annex 1. So requirement regarding design and manufacture, and we will go to the specific detail. So let's anyhow consider the first GSPR number 1, where really summarized in a very important sentence: device shall achieve the performance intended by the manufacturer. So the notified body will look to that. And while then we have all the requirements regarding design and manufacture with all the consideration about safety. Supporting this, we have product specific standard. So supporting GSPR 1, we really need, if you have a syringe, the standard for the syringes. If you have a needle, the standards for performance of a needle. And so for the performances, there is the vertical application of the specific standard. While in chapter 2, we have different areas that depending the device per device, and for the different parts there will be specific standard supporting the section. So I will do now a short overview of chapter 2 of GSPR, just to give you some highlights on the notified body, on the notified attention. First, GSPR 10, which is a very, very big and complex, and it is one of the GSPR that had major changes from the previous essential requirements of the MDD. The section regarding materials, where there is the source of the requirements in Annex 2 to have the definition of all the materials in direct and indirect contact with them. So we have first a need to have in the technical documentation a very, very well detailed assessment of all the materials composing the device. There is a requirement that not all the core materials where you can say my device is made of this, and this, but there is an expectation to have the definition of also the contaminants and the residues which are coming from the full production process, including also those that are not intended to be part of the final device, but that can have the potential to remain on the device because of the production process. So we expect a very, very well detailed assessment of all the contaminants and the residue. There is a GSPR on the compatibility of the device with all the materials with which the device could be in contact. There is a new requirement on the substance and especially of the CMR and ED substances where, depending on the content, there is an expectation of a very well-defined risk assessment by the manufacturer and the justification why certain materials are present in the device, with the justification with the clear consideration also of potentially sensitive patient population. So that's why this is also in correlation with the materials definition. So after definition and detailed listing in the technical documentation of all the materials with which the device is composed, we need the notified body as an expectation of an assessment if any of the material has a potential to be CMR and ED, and with specific justification depending on the content. In chapter 10 of article 10 of Annex 1, there is a new requirement which is much more detailed compared to the past regarding nanomaterials. Which is also in correlation with the classification of the medical device, if there are any possibility of exposure of nanomaterial to the patient, and so that there is a requirement to justify the presence of nanomaterials and the testing and all the potential risk related to the presence of nanomaterials. And so this is the big umbrella of chemical, physical, and biological assessment related to materials and biocompatibility and interaction with the body, and any risk related to the interaction between the body and the material present on the medical device. Moving to Article 11 of Annex 1, these are the big container where the manufacturer shall address infection, microbial contamination. So, for example, something which is not really new in the MDR compared to MDD, validation of sterilization, definition of the sterilization method, evidence that applicable standards on sterilization have been applied, all consideration of cleanliness and the condition of the controlled condition of the production room where the devices are produced, with justification how contamination is kept under control and how bioburden is kept under control with a systematic and continued system. Here we have also packaging, not only in terms of transport and validation of a packaging that ensure the condition of the device in the transport, but also in terms of maintenance of the sterility over the claimed shelf life. And this is the section where, for devices that are reusable, the manufacturer is required to validate the reprocessing instruction mentioned in the instruction for use to demonstrate that the device is safe when it is undergoing reused as mentioned in the instruction for use. So this is for reusable devices. Then, very shortly, if articles under 12 and 13, so presence of ancillary medicinal substances or substances that are dispersed or absorbed in the body depending on intended purpose, or if there is any component from biological origin, human origin, animal origin, and other biological origin, there is an expectation to have a very, very deep assessment of the safety of all these conditions. Okay, then let's move to other requirements that are also applicable to active devices. So first, if there is combination and collection and connections and requirements on electrical safety, we expect that these are applied. If there are interaction with substances, environment, and other devices, we expect an assessment and preclinical data on that. If the device has a measuring function, so not only class 1 measuring function device, but any measuring function claimed by the device, we expect a demonstration of the measuring function and all the metrological characteristics. Then section 16, 17, 18, and 19, there are the part mostly applicable to electrical and electronic devices, so protection against radiation, including electromagnetic compatibility. The section regarding software verification and validation, including cybersecurity, where cybersecurity is an aspect of real attention by the notified body during the assessment. Then electrical safety and functional safety assessment by the notified body. And in addition, in this section, there are the particular requirement for active implantable medical devices. Then some notes. As I told you, I would like to give you some notes about software. This because also in my current experience, many medical devices now proposed for MDR conformity assessment are software standalone or a medical device with embedded software. The requirements mentioned in Article 17 of GSPR so are the expectation to have a verification of repeatability, reliability, and performance, life cycle, risk management, security verification and validation, consideration of the specific features of the mobile platform and any external factors, protection against unauthorized access for the software. And this part is now enriched by complexity of the upcoming implementation of the Artificial Intelligence Act, the AI Act, while since years many software also subjected to medical device conformity assessment are already powered by AI aspect. So that's why the notified bodies are already applying the AI concept, even if we are still in the transition period of the AI Act and the correlation and the clear regulatory cross links between AI Act and MDR and MDR, and I include also IVDR if it's not in the purpose of this meeting, will be clearly defined in the next year. And the next step is August 2025, where the authorities for implementation of the AI Act and interaction with MDR will be defined. But for sure, we already have medical devices where the definition of AI, which is given in Article 3 of the AI Act, is if given. Why I tell you this? I tell you because in the preclinical data, if your medical device software or if your software embedded in the active medical device is powered with AI modules, you already have to consider the specificity described in the AI Act, where our experts and our assessors are already dealing. And just to give you 5 important aspects that are part of an assessment of a medical device software powered with AI: data and data governance, record keeping, human oversight, accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity, transparency and provision of information. This is something that if your medical device includes AI concepts, then our assessor will ask you. And just to give you a little bit more details, this has not the purpose to be exhaustive. For that, I recommend you we have, just to make some marketing, we have very good training on AI interacting with medical device directive. For example, the base for the machine learning, how the manufacturer define the training set, the test set and validation set for the data, how labeling was conducted, how bias and control measure have been implemented. This is something that our assessors will look for, as well as record keeping, how there is an automatic recording of the logs over the lifetime, also linked to the PMS and to vigilance. Then also human oversight, how the medical device consider the human machine interface tools with the risk minimization, considering the risk, the level of autonomy of the device and the context of use of the medical device software. Of course, accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity will be considered for any medical device software, but there will be a specific attention in case of AI to resilience to errors, fault, and inconsistency with the technical redundant solution. And finally, transparency and provision of the information to the deployer to enable the deployers to correctly have an interpretation of the system output is something that in the technical documentation assessment of the medical device software with AI, our assessor will go into details. Even if there is no yet explicit application of the AI in the context of the medical device regulation, our assessor, if there is AI in the medical device software, are already applying this requirement. So I close this bracket on software and medical device, and I go to the conclusion. So finally, final GSPR to complete the list before the section 23 of GSPR relating to information, which is 20, 21, and 22, protection against mechanical and thermal risk, protection against the risk posed to the patient or user by devices applying energy substances, and finally, requirements for devices intended to be used by layperson. We expect that there are preclinical testing supporting these three GSPRs. So I hope I have still some minutes to complete. I have the final slides because I don't want to stall time for the question and answer session. I have 4 take-home messages based on the experience of the notified body. Something about the testing methods. I saw also a question in the chat, so maybe I will already respond to the question in this. Then something about documentation issues, something about samples tested in the preclinical testing, and something about testing laboratories. Patricia already told something, but I will go to some more detail. First, testing methods. The notified body, if there is a standard, we expect that the testing is performed according to the standard. Okay? In case there is no standard, we expect that there is a very detailed and precise definition of the testing protocol based on an internal protocol. So we go to the topic of the validation of the testing and the analytical method. If the testing methodology is defined in a standard, and if the test is conducted externally by an external lab holding a GLP or ISO 17025 accreditation for the same standard as a notified body, we assume that the testing and the analytical method is validated, automatically validated. But if the testing is conducted in-house, we expect an evidence of the validation of the testing method and the analytical method. So we expect an explicitly documented protocol and report of the validation of the analytical method. Second, regarding documentation issues, we expect a very good documentation of protocol and reports. In case you did changes and amendments, we expect that protocol and reports are documented with a document control concept. There is an expectation that protocols and reports are two different documents, so that you issue a protocol and the testing method before conducting the test. We expect that there is a very clear interpretation of results with a clear handling of out of specification and deviation. So when a specific result does not fulfill the acceptance criteria, we expect that the protocols defined which samples have been used for testing, how many, which is the justification of the sample size, this in correlation with the design requirement. And we expect that in the report, it's very clear what you tested, which was the lot, which was the characteristic, which were the environment, and all the items used for testing. And please consider this is applicable to all cases, including, for example, dataset for the AI machine learning testing. While for a biocompatibility test, it's very direct that the tested sample is the physical unit. However, we need to know which lot was, with which material was constructed, which is the traceability. The same is to be applied when we have the tested software, especially the AI, where the data set is critical for the demonstration of performances. Samples shall be representative, and in case you used for testing something which was a prototype of something which was prepared only for the testing, we need anyhow that this is traceable, because we have an expectation to be sure that what you tested is representative of what you will then subject to the conformity assessment. And then the note about the use of external laboratories. So we have an expectation that for a specific test, if you use an external laboratory, there is an accreditation, GLP or ISO 17025 on the specific test. If not, it is not, the consequence is not necessarily that the test is rejected, but then the notified body will have a further assessment. So we will ask evidence of validation of the testing method. And in some cases, we consider in that case the external laboratory a critical supplier with the need of an audit. So where the notified body will go to check how the testing is conducted. But consider that parallel, if you do the testing method internally, during the audit, we'll go to check which instrument you use, which are the documentation, how raw data are used, with reagents and components used for testing, and other supporting material. So I hope I was not too long. I have the very final slide. One is that let me say to all the audience that TÜVSÜD has some very good laboratories that can provide testing service. And second, that TÜVSÜD provided training courses and seminars, good as the one that Asphalion is doing. I hope so. And so I complete with the thank you, and I'm open to any question, and so you have also my reference, so in case you want to contact me, feel free to contact me. So thank you very much. I stopped the sharing.
Amazing. Thank you, Carlo, for this thorough presentation. We have just a couple of minutes, and we have like 4 questions. First one is for Patricia, and then there are 3 for you. Patricia, this one is from Dario. Is test method validation required for data analysis methods used in test protocols and reports concerning the functionality and safety of medical devices? And can this be requested during the technical file assessment? Sorry, we can hear you, Patricia. You're muted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I would like to clarify here what type of testing is implied here in performance safety testing, because as Carlo mentioned, depends on the protocol that has been followed, and if it is a standard design or it is an in-house protocol. So it is implied that it's what is exactly that the protocol and what is exactly the testing when it is implied safety and performance testing.
Okay. Thank you so much, Patricia. If Dario has further questions, he can send them to info@asphalion.com, and then you can answer him per email. And then for Carlo, there's one question from Francisco Rodriguez. What strategy is currently being followed for low-risk legacy medical devices where the manufacturer lacks preclinical evidence to demonstrate performance, but has a complete clinical evaluation under MDR based on the product's post-marketing data?
Wow, thank you for this question, which is not easy, easy to respond. Let me the joke. So first, I would say that is a case by case, because if it's a low risk device, most probably the claims and the safety and performance aspect are limited to something. But so maybe the manufacturer can propose a strategy to justify the absence of certain evidence. But on the other side, if the claims, if the clinical evaluation is based only on post-marketing data, it depends of which post-marketing data are. If they are a pure passive results of complaints and vigilance and so on, they can be poor, they can be not complete, because usually they are not so representative of the performance, but they are simply saying that there is an absence of major problems. So I would say that it depends on the claims of the manufacturer. To be honest, while for legacy devices, low risk, while for clinical evaluation, there are certain strategies also mentioned by MDCG documents. For absence of preclinical evidence, since the preclinical evidence is something that is usually, since it's preclinical, can be demonstrated by a testing, by a lab testing. So in an MDR conformity assessment, it's a little bit difficult to say no, that the manufacturer say, I have no preclinical testing simply because it's a legacy device. So generally saying, I would have an expectation of some preclinical testing is available. Francisco, did I respond or I'm open to, I don't know if we have time also for an exchange.
The thing is, the participants are muted, but he says thank you, Carlo. So yes,
Okay.
probably you
Okay.
responded. So the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
one
yeah.
is from Dario Catania.
Okay.
Do you expect a minimum statistical reliability and confidence level to be applied in the sampling criteria for design verification when functionality is tested using go or no-go tests?
Okay, thank you, Dario, for this question. You also gave the response, which is a very good response. Yes, we expect the statistical justification, even for a go, no-go test, is supported by a sampling, a statistical sampling approach, which in some cases a little bit easy because there are very good tools for statistics to support your sample size, but we have the expectation. Then, of course, the reliability and confidence depends on the risk management. So it's to the manufacturer to assign the risk level, and as a consequence, the reliability and confidence expected depends on the risk level. But we expect that there is, sure, for sure.
Great, thank you. And one last question for you, Carlo, from Pitruta. I would appreciate your opinion on the following matter. If a medical device contains processed substances of vegetal origins, for instance, cellulose, that comply with the highest pharmaceutical standards, e.g. European Pharmacopoeia, the processed raw material of vegetal origin can be considered as containing non-viable biological substances. More specifically, I am seeking clarification whether the general safety and performance requirement 13.3 is applicable in such case.
So by heart, maybe I need to have a very look to the GSPR 13, but if the question is, if I have a material of vegetal origin and I have an evidence that from the supplier, I have the declaration of compliance that it's fully compliant with the European Pharmacopoeia, I'm not sure that in any case we consider that there is absence of non-viable biological substances, but we need a certain testing evidence that the non-viable biological substances are so that the viable biological substances are absent. But let me open quickly GSPR 13. Here I have it. Okay. Okay, I have it. The screen software. Okay. For device manufacturer using non viable other entities to the purpose of testing. Yeah. So I would say that the 13.3 is applicable for material of vegetal origin, and you have to demonstrate that there are no viable biological substance. There's an expectation that this is demonstrated. Then, if you demonstrate it through documents from your suppliers and evidence of testing and qualified supplier, or you do again the testing, it's up to you, and you can propose to the notified body your strategy. But generally speaking, I would say that there is an expectation that this GSPR is fulfilled. I hope that I responded to your
Petruda, thanks you for your answer, Carlo.
Okay.
So
Good.
if we have no more questions, that's a wrap. Thank you very much to Carlo and Patricia for the fantastic presentation, and thank you to everyone who attended. Just remind you that you can send us still your questions at info@asfania.com, and I wish you all a nice afternoon ahead. Thank you so much.
Very good. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.